Hello, welcome to this first video on effective modeling. Here I will be talking about the pipeline that you should be trying to follow, how to save on polygons, and also how to lay out your UVs within the UV texture editor. Now, the first thing we have to look at is a pipeline. So what is a pipeline? A pipeline is essentially a sequence of steps used to achieve a goal. It's important to have a pipeline when modeling within Maya to create a sort of a stable and efficient workflow. If you just say, for example, model 5 things and then UV unwrap 5 things and then texture them, it's going to be a sort of a very long drawn out process and very painful as well, speaking by my own experience. What you should try to do is follow the one here on the screen right now. As you can see, model first, check for errors, which we'll talk about in a later video. UV unwrap, check to make sure it's correctly outlined, texture it, and then export it into a game engine such as Unity or UDK. This is the sort of pipeline you should try to work for. Again, it will help to churn out models faster. You don't want to be wasting time trying to UV so many different things. If you can make a model, UV it, texture it, get it into my Unity or UDK, that's just going to make your process a heck of a lot more quicker. Try to go for this sort of pipeline, adopt it into your workflow. Again, it's more efficient, faster for you, and once you've sort of got this pipeline down, you can try to adopt it in your own sort of style, maybe do 2 at a time or different ways you can do it, but try to adopt this particular pipeline. So the second thing I'll talk about is how to save on your polygons. Now, here's a little scene that I've made just out of various props that I've made of my own projects. Now, with video games, there are far more constraints within them compared to movies or TV. This is because video games have to run everything in real time for players. Now, we're in the 8th generation now with PS4, Xbox One, where we can have far more polygons than ever before on screen at one time. It could be going to the millions now. But that being said, we still need to save on areas that don't need it. So the first thing you should do is obviously have your polygon count up on screen so you can keep an eye on how many polys you're using. So to bring up the poly count, you go to display, heads up display, poly count. Now what you'll need to look at is actually the tries. Game engines use tries. So even though you'll be working in quads within Maya, when you export it into, say, Unity or UDK, it will automatically triangulate it for you. So yeah, that's what your poly count is. Your poly count is your try count. So always look at that. Don't look at the faces or the edges. So the best way to save on polygons is to delete areas which players will never see. For example, this barrel. It looks pretty normal, sure. But if I just move it up a bit, you can see that there is actually no faces underneath. This is because this is a static object which will never move at all. Unless you do like a physics game, say for example Half-Life 2, where this barrel could be sort of pushed around, moved around, you'll obviously have to model the entire thing. But the key thing to remember is, if the players can't see it, it doesn't exist. You may have seen it in games where you might have accidentally clipped the camera through an object. You may have noticed like, oh, it doesn't have any faces there. That's because there's no need for them. Just, that's a good way of saving on polygons, is deleting areas which will never be seen. As you can see in this scene here, not just the barrel, but also the pillars here and the door, all don't have back faces. Why? Well, because I don't need them. They're wasting space if I have them there. The players will never see behind that door or behind this pillar, ergo there's no need for those polys to be there. That's one way of saving on polygons. The second thing as well is to determine which models require the most polygons. As you can see here, this is probably the highest one in the scene, as it's sort of the main focal point of the scene, the barrel, which is 510 tries. If you have smaller objects or objects that don't require as much detail or density, then don't bother trying to adding all those details. A good example here is with these 2 rocks here. As you can see, this one is 512, this one here is only 128. These objects are incredibly small. The player, this character here, we'll never see all that detail in this one rock. It's better off to use this one because it's less tried, you can have far more of them scattered around the level, than having one object which has so many polygons which the player's never going to see anyway because the item's so small. Or you have to judge it on an individual level. So if it's a larger object, then obviously it will require much more detail, as compared to a smaller object will need pretty much no detail whatsoever. Another way to save on polygons is to reuse your assets, reusing them in different ways. If you've got like modular assets, again, we'll talk about that a bit later, you can give them different textures. As you can see here, these two are the exact same models, but yet they have different textures on them. Rather than just creating a whole new set of rocks to sort of have a different texture on, I can use the existing model and just place a new texture over that. That way I'm saving on my polygons already because I don't have to model completely new different types of rocks. Just putting a new texture over it will do just as well.